Hour 2 of Middays. We're live in the Element Well studio on this
Friday Eve.
We're pleased to welcome now Brad White, Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation. Hey, Brad. How's it going, man?
Good. Thank you for having me. Always good to see you and always good to be with you.
You bet. Appreciate it. So first, just give us an update. I know a lot of folks are always interested, Brad, on projects around the state, status of those, expectations.
Yeah, well, we've got a lot of work out on the streets, a lot of things going on. Our capacity construction program is in full swing with projects going from DeSoto County and Tippah County all the way down to the Mississippi Gulf Coast, where we're adding capacity and efficiency to our system to try to alleviate some traffic woes. We're still playing catch-up with our maintenance program, but trying to rehabilitate the 33,000-plus miles that the taxpayers have around the state in the existing highways and interstates. And a lot of our time, though, lately has obviously been with the legislature and the discussion that's going on now with the competing tax bills and proposals. Both the House and the Senate have made infrastructure funding, both from MDOT standpoint as well as the counties, their state aid program, center in that discussion. And we're excited about that because it's the first time that our funding model has been brought forward in any legislation like this since 1987.
Yeah.
So we have an opportunity, I think, of revisiting and hopefully modernizing the way that we fund transportation around the state, and we're excited to see that move forward.
Okay. Well, did you play a role in the design of any of those approaches?
We've enjoyed good relationships with the leadership of both houses. We were approached by both, talking through what their ideas were. I mean, the members of the legislature, they're the policymakers, and it's our job to execute whatever revenue they give us. Both have different ideas, obviously, but both came to us and we provided information showing what the shortfall within our budget might be, trying to illustrate to them, too, where the money would go. We helped write legislation, the part of the legislation that would tie the money directly to projects so that the legislature could have confidence that every bit of money that they gave us would go to the projects outlined in our 3-year plan.
Okay.
So transparency was a big thing that I wanted to put there because I don't think that there was any way that we could expect the membership to vote on increasing our revenue stream if they didn't have confidence that the taxpayers were going to see an immediate result from those investments. So we've been working trying to make sure that the legislation was written in a way that the members voting on it, and whichever bill ends up going through, that they could have confidence that the money's going to actual projects.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. So I recall in the past, Brad, you've talked about trying to figure out a way to produce a reliable stream of revenue that would be dedicated to the department, that would enable the department to access more federal funding.
Right.
And in the past, I think you've talked about perhaps carving out part of the use taxes.
Right. We've given proposals in the past that would not have required any type of a tax increase, although that probably wouldn't allow for any type of a tax cut because of the amount of money that we need in order to run our program. Both the Senate bill increases the fuel tax over 3 years. The House bill adds a sales tax on the consumption of fuel. Both would generate in the neighborhood of $200 to $300 million for the Department of Transportation, not counting what that would give to the counties for state aid work, all of which would go directly to the rehabilitation of our system, that's the one thing that I want people to understand. We are a Department of Transportation, and we like investing money in ports and airports and rail and public transit, and we like building these big capacity construction projects that make traffic flow a lot easier. But what we're held accountable for by the Federal Highway Administration is the maintenance and rehabilitation of the existing system.
Gotcha.
And so we have performance targets that we have to hit every year, or that federal money could become in jeopardy. And we faced that in Mississippi back in 2018 with some of the local bridges that federal auditors found that they were in much worse condition than what some of the reports showed. So if our performance targets continue to decline because the amount of money simply not going as far with projects, then there is an opportunity for us to risk as a state losing our federal money. So I hope that regardless of how the negotiations go in the conversation, that a focus can be kept on this core function of government, because I think without a efficient and well built out transportation system, you can't have real economic development, community development, like we've said before, and it sounds cliché, It doesn't matter how much money we put in public schools if the school buses can't cross bridges getting to them, and it doesn't matter how good your health care is if you get stuck in traffic on the way to the hospital. So,
yeah, and we've also been successful in the last couple of years in landing some major economic development projects, and all of those rely on infrastructure improvements.
MDOT's brought into those conversations very early on because, as you said, when they get here, they've got to be able to see that we're going to provide a transportation network that allows them to get both their goods and their people in and out of the facility. We were talking before, Senator Trent Lott used to say if they can't get here, they're not coming.
Right.
I mean, having a well built out transportation system across all modes, I think, is key to being able to have true economic development.
Yeah. Well, we've been blessed in that respect, that we, the governor, MDA, local economic development organizations have done yeoman's work, honestly, in bringing these big projects to Mississippi. But they do consider infrastructure. It's that and energy are the top issues.
Right. And the legislature, when they're putting together these economic development packages, they obviously have to put in the funding for what transportation network improvements we have to make.
Right.
And as you know, we run this reimbursement program where we spend our state funds and are reimbursed with the federal. And so it's not just important the amount of money MDOT gets, but how we get it. And if we could have a dedicated, reliable stream of revenue to where we could plan out and respond to these types of potential investments that come around the state as well as the needs there, we can better plan out into the future, and the legislature won't have to be so reactionary with one-time money, all over the place. It's just a better way to do business.
So, Brad, it's no secret since President Trump was elected, there's been an incredible focus in Washington on spending abuse and waste and fraud and so forth, and so that seems to be catching hold across the country, even at the state level. Talk about the efficiency at MDOT and what sort of actions you're taking there to make sure the taxpayer money is being spent responsibly.
Sure. Well, when I was hired as director, that was one of the things that was important to me, because the people that I heard from when I was hired from the legislature, they were interested in making sure that MDOT was, one, transparent, but two, is putting to use the money as best we could and making sure that it got to projects. If you look at our 2024 actual spending, out of a $1.5 billion budget, 97% of that went in some way to something connected with building a road or a bridge or some type of project, whether it was in one of the other modes of transportation. 97% of our budget in some way touches these projects that we're responsible for. Out of the other 3%, you're looking at our information systems, our welcome center work, so equipment that we have to buy, some of the salaries, within the development. But 97% of our budget already goes to a project in some fashion that is built and maintained around the state. And when you look at how we're scrutinized, by virtue of us being a partner with Federal Highway and implementing a federal program, every year the U.S. Department of Transportation's Office of Inspector General comes in and audits all of our programs. The Federal Highway Administration's fire audit, which is financial integrity review and evaluation, they come in. That's a program that's an annual audit that assesses how states are managing the federal funds for the various projects that we have. Here at the state level, peer, over the last few years, we've had 5 or 6 peer reviews that go in and look at the accountability and transparency within the Department of Transportation. And peer is a staff that reports directly to the legislature. The peer committee is made up by legislators. This is their watchdog. And we've had reviews from peer as recent as 2018. Back in 2020, the legislature had the state auditor come in and do a complete review of the Department of Transportation of one of these performance audits, which was very thorough and very helpful. It was something that I used, but it showed that MDOT functions in a pretty high level. And then when you look at the other things, we have a state financial audit annually, a federal single audit annually. We have a fixed asset and property audit annually. We have payroll audits as recent as 18 and 22, and a compliance audit in 17. And that's before you get to the financial internal control assessment that's done annually by the Department of Finance and Administration. So I think in every way, the Department of Transportation is transparent. We put our cards on the table. We provide this 3-year plan to the legislature in a way that they can have confidence that the investment they make in infrastructure, that we're going to make sure it gets to the roads where the people expect it to go.
the organization's organizational chart and its annual report is all available online for public viewing,
all
right?
on the website.
Yeah. I mean,
all
so
on the website. And keep in mind, our commission meetings are live streamed. I mean, that was one of the things we did after I became director. I mean, I don't think the agency's ever been as transparent as we are now.
Okay. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio. It's Executive Director of MDOT, Brad White. We're back with you in the Element Wealth studio. Brad White, Executive Director of MDOT, is our guest. So you mentioned in the last segment, Brad, that the Office of State Auditor had conducted an audit, a review, not just a financial statement project, which is an engagement which they do every year. I think they're required by law to do that, if I'm not mistaken.
Well,
right?
This was a special one. This is one that the legislature dictated to go very much in depth beyond just a single audit and a normal financial audit.
Not a financial audit, but rather just an audit of a performance audit, which is completely different than preparing financial statements and reviewing the financial records of the organization, and then again producing that and assembling that into a report, the annual report, which includes that information. But they did that. Was there anything that was actionable from that you implemented?
They showed a lot. I mean, for one, it painted MDOT in a pretty good light. And what it told me basically was MDOT had been doing a good job. Just engineers sometimes aren't the best communicators in the world, and there were some items that I think we could present differently to show the facts as they are in a way that people could actually understand what you're giving them and showing them. But there were things, for example, the commission used to have the ability to enter into what they called help bonds, where a local government, if they wanted to do a project, a city would issue the bonds and we would enter into an agreement with them to pay them off. And so it basically gave the department the ability to have like a credit card. And so we went to the legislature removed that. So now any kind of debt that's incurred has to go through the bond commission just like anybody else. We brought in some financial advisors that helped us restructure that debt and cutting about $45 million out of the interest that we were paying and getting it paid off about 8 years earlier. It looked at the way in which we deliver products. After Katrina, Governor Haley Barbour led the way in getting MDOT some design build opportunities in order to try to expedite some of the rebuilding of the South Mississippi after Katrina. But we never did anything to expand on that, and other states around us had just passed us by. And so we went back to the legislature as a result of looking at that and asked them to give us the authority to do a complete and utter design build, and we created an alternative delivery division within MDOT, where now we're able to bring in, and we're doing this incidentally on the MDA project up in North Mississippi. We'll identify a contractor and a consultant on the front end. We bring everybody in at the beginning that starts going through the design phase and everything together to mitigate risk. So you don't run into some of the stuff that we might have had on Highway 49 a few years back, where you run into things that were not anticipated and you end up with change orders and things like that can be costly but necessary. So we believe that this gives us an extra tool that we didn't have before in delivering the product to the taxpayer, one, quicker, but also saving some money because you cut out a lot of the mistakes. It's been a lot of time dealing with things that are kind of obvious, like whether or not we should be in the business of rest areas and welcome centers and things like that, how you could better manage that. I don't know that there's a political will to really do away with some of those or to consolidate some of those, but that was part of it. But there were some suggestions that I thought the audit was very helpful. Auditor White got me a copy of it as soon as I was appointed director. And I went through it, and I'm sure it's available for the public to see on the auditor's website and maybe on ours. But it had a lot of good information, and we've used a lot of that information. Some of it mainly required legislative action in order to allow us to do it, like the alternative delivery and like making sure that the department doesn't take on debt without approval of the bond commission, things like that.
Did the report actually identify and state and quantify potential savings from taking these actions? And if so, have you calculated how much of what was recommended that's been implemented has done in terms of saving money?
It didn't suggest any savings. We do think it's going to be great, and we're just now getting into where we're going to have projects that we're using this new design build on.
Yeah.
So we'll be able to quantify that in the future, about what that would look like.
Okay. So at this point, would you say that, hey, if we implement all this, we don't really need any additional revenue, that this would offset the need for any additional revenue?
But unfortunately, it's just that we're that far behind in what it takes to hit your performance measures. I mean, keep in mind, if we're in a perfect world, and this is something that you can quantify, when you know what your federal performance requirements are and the condition of the pavement being good, fair, or poor, and you can only have a certain percentage in poor, and you're shooting to get here and here, then you know how many projects you've got to let in order to keep how many lane miles rehabilitated to the point to beat there, and then you know what it's costing today in doing that. Right now, you're running a $485 million shortfall and being able to award the projects necessary to keep everything in the good column that would be ideal.
Okay.
Now, I live in the real world, and I don't think there's any way that you could get that type of revenue from the legislature right now. So we've just been asking for them to look at our funding model and recognize that we're in 2025 operating off of a 1987 funding model. And in the past, we've always put all our eggs into the basket of the fuel tax. And I'm a big believer in what other states have done is to try to look at a more diversified approach at pulling the dedicated streams of revenue from various sources within the budget that collectively can eat away at that shortfall and provide for the core function of government in a way that the taxpayers can handle. But it's not my job to
You
make
got a $1.3 billion, $1.4 billion budget
a little
right
more
now?
than 1.4.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the tax bill...
53% of that's federal money.
Gotcha. The tax bill, for example, out of the House is estimated to produce, once you net out the loss of the lottery proceeds you currently receive, which is $80 million a year, $320 million or so, something in that neighborhood. Could you find $320 million of savings right now at MDOT such that you wouldn't need that additional revenue?
No.
Like I think that's the question.
97% of our budget right now is connected to a project in some way.
Okay.
So out of the $1.4 something billion that we spent last year in 2024, 97% of it in some way is connected to one of the projects that's outlined in the 3-year plan.
Okay.
And that's something that peer and everybody can go to and see. And the other 3% that you're looking at where you might talk about cutting, that's our information, so our technology. We have to have our own platform that interfaces with the Federal Highway Administration so that we can get the federal reimbursements we have. We have the payroll, we have equipment budgets, we have the welcome centers. All of those come from that 3%. Now, there are things that you could cut, sure, but it's going to take political will to say maybe the MDOT shouldn't be paying for the welcome centers and the rest areas around the state. Maybe we shouldn't be giving the Department of Agriculture $800,000 a year for beaver control. There's other things that come out of our budget that we do, and that there's a reason why it's in there.
Interesting.
But those are all legislative edicts that the commission nor I have the opportunity or the authority to move.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, well that's interesting. That's interesting perspective that you provided there. How much of our actual construction and maintenance is outsourced to third parties, private companies that are in that construction business versus that we do internally?
Most all of it is going to be outsourced in some way. The maintenance that our forces do are what you would call routine maintenance, maybe replacing some guardrails, patching potholes, doing things like that. But when you see the real rehabilitation of a highway where it's milled up and ground and new asphalt is laid out, that's something that we contract out to asphalt companies or bridge companies that do the bridges and big construction projects. Those are the big construction companies that come in and do that.
Contractors are notorious for presenting change orders in the midst of a project. You guys deal with that all the time. Do you feel like that's under control, or is there something we could do better there to avoid those additional costs?
I'm sure there's always room for improvement, but the thing that I would remind everybody is we run a federal program. The commission nor the staff has the authority to issue any type of change order that the Federal Highway Administration is not first convinced that it's needed, that it's necessary, and that they're willing to participate in the funding of it.
Okay. Didn't know that.
So, again, over the years, there has always been this talk about how do we address the transparency issue with MDOT? Let's have another audit of MDOT. Well, we've been audited more than any state agency in the state, and it's never come back with anything that finds some gross negligence within the department. So
Gotcha.
it's one of those deals, and it's always ironic that a lot of times some of the biggest people that I find that complain kind of made their living off the taxpayers doing some things that nobody at MDOT gets to do without taking leave.